at the end of class as we do it. My computer, my laptop, is not always communicating very well with the system today, so I've had to restart several times. So set up a little prayer that we just keep on going in today's class as we do this. We're going to start with anatomy. A lot of people like to call the first semester class anatomy, this class physiology, but we are doing anatomy and physiology both semesters. So we're going to focus on eye anatomy. While we're here, this is just a reminder. How many of you actually have glasses or have them in order right now? Okay, so about half of you. The rest of you, please don't wait. You do want to get credit for the labs. You do want to be able to do the labs as we do things. Let's start with some terms to make sure we understand what we're talking about. So when we talk about absorbing light, that means that light is no longer detected. It's within as we do this. Okay, so if it's external, it's not going to be detected. Except if we are absorbing light from a pigment, okay, then we can detect it internally. So light has to be absorbed for us to be able to detect it when it's a pigment. But if you're looking at light, this is green. Green light is being reflected. All the other light waves are being absorbed. Okay, so when we're external to the body, everything that you see, some of the light is absorbed, some of it is reflected. We only see the reflected light, but then we're going to absorb it internally so we can detect it. Absorb is just going into. To transmit is to go through. So when we're going to be talking about the cornea and the lens, we'll get to those. Light goes through them, just like windows. Transmit is to go through. And does anybody know what refract means? Bounce off. Refract is not bounce off, that's what reflect is. Refract is a fancy word for bending. Okay, so we're going to bend the light. You can see light refraction here. Light is going to be bent when it's under the fluid as compared to the air. Okay, so be prepared. We're going to be using all of these terms in today's lecture and in our next lecture. I'm going to start with some basic anatomy. We do this part pretty quickly. So the eyebrows, they don't do a lot. They do give a little bit of shade from the sun. But a big part is you do have a high concentration of sweat glands. Hopefully you remember that and cover that in the skin. And so it's going to prevent at least some of that sweat from falling into the eyes. The eyelids, which cranial nerve closes the eyelids? Okay, oculomotor, which is number? 3. Okay. We are going to have reflexive blinking, regular blinking to prevent the eye from drying out. This blinking helps spread fluids coming from the tarsal glands. These are excrements. This is a solution going to the surface. It is an oily secretion. This is not tears. Tears are wet, they're aqueous. Having oil, lipids over the water, over the tears, traps it, makes it harder for the tears to evaporate. So it's going to protect by having this oily film that basically is between the open air and the water that's going to protect the eye. Conjunctiva is the mucous membrane that's lining both the eyelid and the eye surface. So right in here, it is going to be for lubrication. So again, we can have smooth movements of the eye. What is conjunctivitis? Okay, some sort of itis always means inflammation. It's very painful when the conjunctiva becomes inflamed. Now, instead of nice, smooth movements, it's going to be painful movements as we do things. Okay, the lacrimal gland. I don't have it up there. What is the cranial nerve? Facial, which is 7. Okay. We're going to have that your lacrimal glands are actually not here on the inside, but over on the outer part of your eyes. And as you secrete tears, oh, I did have cranial nerve here, we're going to have that as you blink, you move those tears over to where that lacrimal bone is, and the water actually is going to go through your nasal cavity, which is something you become aware of when you do crying, okay? If you've been hurt, either physically or emotionally, all that excess tears, yes, it goes down your cheeks, but a lot of it goes through your nose. You end up with the runny nose as that happens. Okay, let's slow down just a little bit because now we're going to go into some newer stuff. Your eye has 3 layers to it. We call them tunics. A tunic is just kind of a shirt or a layer as we do this. So we have the outer fibrous tunic. Then we're going to have a middle vascular tunic. What does vascular refer to? Okay, we're going to talk about blood vessels. And then we're going to have a sensory tunic, the innermost, as we do things. So we've got these layers. Now we're going to look at each layer in the parts we find in the layer. So most of the outer tunic is the sclera. The sclera is the white part of your eye. You can see part of it, but of course it's going to go all the way around the back of the eye. It gives shape. It's also really tough. It's going to give protection. Your eye is not easily penetrated. And this is also where all of those extrinsic eye muscles attach. This is one reason also it has to be tough, because when those muscles pull, we don't want them ripping apart that layer as we move our eyes. At the front, this outermost tunic is not like the sclera, but it's going to be the cornea. We're going to have cells that have special proteins called crystallins. And these crystallins allow light to be transmitted. What does it mean for light to be transmitted? Okay, it's going to go through. And as it goes through, the light will also be refracted. What did it mean to be refracted? Okay, we're going to bend. We're going to do most of our bending of light with the cornea. Okay, so the cornea does a lot of bending of the light as it is transmitted, as it comes in. So that was the outer tunic. The middle tunic is also going to be different at the back of the eye versus the front of the eye. The back of the eye, it is choroid. So what they've made kind of red here would be the choroid. It has a lot of blood vessels. There's going to be a high demand for ATP, as we'll talk about next time in the eye. And so we need to have a really rich blood supply. And the choroid has that. It also has a pigment. Now, I've used this term before. What does it mean for something to be a pigment? Okay, when you think of pigment, you think of color. But when we are in anatomy and physiology, the important things about pigment is that they absorb light. Okay? Now, before when I talked about absorbing light, it was so that we could detect the light. This absorption of light, though, is not about detection, it's about getting rid of light. Now, that seems strange. But we're going to have light come in. We're going to try to detect the light, absorb it, but some of that light gets past the photoreceptors, get past the detectors. What would happen to light if we don't absorb it? What did we say light does if you don't absorb it? What was the term we used right at the start? What's happening to the green light right here that's not being absorbed? Okay, it's being reflected. We don't want light to be reflected in our eye. Then it starts bouncing around, and then it will be absorbed somewhere else, and now what are we looking at? Because this light, we want to know where it's coming from when we absorb it. So whatever we don't catch, We want it to be absorbed so it can't bounce around, can't be reflected as we do this. Not every species has that. If you look at, like deer in the headlights sort of thing. Deer don't catch that excess light because they like being at night, and so their light does bounce around, which is great if you don't have a lot of light, but if there's a lot of light, it makes it hard to see. Everybody catching the two important things about the choroid. Lots of blood vessels for nutrients, pigment to absorb excess light. Put that adjective in there. We're going to do the excess light. The light that we're not detecting, that we want to make sure to get rid of it so we can properly detect the other light. Again, at the front part of the eye, we're going to have the ciliary body. The ciliary body has ciliary muscle, which is a smooth muscle. What cranial nerve did we talk about, have you learned about, that is involved with ciliary muscle? The smooth muscle in the eye. Which one is that?
Oculomotor.
Oculomotor, which is number 3. What did we say oculomotor does?
Near vision.
Okay, it's going to help us with 2 things. Pupil constriction and near vision, which we'll learn about next time. And here we have this. We also have ciliary processes that are going to be making aqueous humor. We're going to come to it later, but let's just get this out here right now. Humor. In anatomy and physiology, humor is not funny stuff, but it is going to be fluids. Okay, so it's an old term. The Greeks used to believe that everybody was made up of 4 different humors, and they tried to balance those out, so we still have that there. Also part of this is going to be the iris and the pupil. The iris is the colored part of your eye. Even though it's a small part of your eye, when we say somebody has blue eyes or brown eyes, we're talking about the iris. Even though, again, most of the eye is white or something else as we do this. The size of the pupil is going to depend on the iris. So we're going to have the ciliary muscle control it. What did sympathetic do to the size of the pupil? Okay, dilate. Does dilate mean bigger or smaller? Bigger. Okay. And then, of course, what will parasympathetic do? Constrict, and we've already said it, but what is that cranial nerve? 3, which is? Oculomotor. I'm just going to keep on asking if we do this. Okay. Now, to finish our tour of the tunics, we had the outermost, the fibrous. We had the middle, which was vascular. And now the innermost part, this is kind of the purpose of the eye. This is the sensory. This is where we're going to actually detect light. We're going to absorb it so we can detect it. And the nervous layer is called the retina. I don't think I have that there. The retina. And the retina contains, when is it, 3 different types of cells, 3 categories of cells. Photoreceptors, which actually detect the light. Bipolar neurons that are going to receive the information from the photoreceptors. And then another type of neuron called ganglion cells. Those ganglion cells, their axons are all going to come together to form the nerve that brings visual information to the brain. What nerve is that? Optic nerve, which is number 2. Okay, so we're going to have this here. Now, one thing to recognize, actually, here, that information as we do this. One thing to note, it is backwards of what you would expect. This is where light is coming from. Light will go through past the ganglion cells, past the bipolar cells, and then finally hit the photoreceptors. And actually, it's this part of the photoreceptor where light will be absorbed. Okay, this really seems weird. It seems like you would want to put the photoreceptors first. One reason why we have it backwards, and this is true of other vertebrates as well, is because what is this layer right here on this side of the retina? What did we just talk about? What tunic is it? This is a sensory tunic. What's the one that just outside it? The vascular tunic. What part of the vascular tunic is here?